All right, friends, welcome to the channel. Now, I know by now you've seen me do a million iterations of how to build stuff in Python, but I'm hoping you're following along and learning how to become a better Python developer along the way. Let me start by saying I'm 100% self-taught, so I would by no means describe myself as a good Python developer, but about a year ago, I was in many of your shoes where I hadn't done any Python development and I was put in a position where I had to build a lot of code for some automation tasks I was doing in Domo. And what I found myself doing is I found myself writing the same functions over and over again, the same functions for handling authentication, the same functions for retrieving data from the query data API. And I thought to myself, my God, wouldn't it just be smarter to have one library that has a class for all of the things I need to interact with, and I can just recycle that library. And then I thought to myself, well, I mean, I have this YouTube channel. I might as well just make my code available on GitHub. And so that's the journey we're embarking on today. I'm going to take this Domo GitHub library, which I showed you guys a tutorial previously for how to sync Domo Jupyter with GitHub. I'm going to start just throwing all of the classes that I've developed into here as I create tutorials about them. So just to give you guys an idea of how we're going to structure this, the main folder is going to contain Domo classes. So a Domo class might be a data set. It might be the full auth object. It might be a Domo role or a Domo user. Those are all classes, right? Entities in Domo. And then, I don't care about the user. I care about adding a user to Domo or creating a new role that has a bunch of grants. Okay, so what we'll learn how to do is we're going to learn how but again, I'm not by any means a great developer, but we're going to learn how I structured my Domo classes and then how I broke up the code to kind of make it maintainable. Because as I said, the function for getting an auth token, I only want to write that once and never write it again. The function for getting a data set from Domo and then structuring it into a data frame, I want to write it once and never again. So we'll put the methods that interact with the Domo class inside the Domo class. But the actual call to the API, we're going to put in a /roots folder. And the reason we're going to do that is because Domo can change the APIs, not at will, but they can change APIs to make them better, to make them faster, or different APIs will serve different functions. So we might say, hey, I've got v1 of this get data function that hits this API, but there might be one that does it a little bit faster. So maybe I want to do a v2 iteration without having to change my data class method. So as long as I'm passing a similarly structured object back into my data class, my Domo class, it should be able to react the same way. So we're going to take a look at how I compartmentalize this code. I'm going to assume that you know a little bit of Python coding, so I'm not going to really belabor too much of it. But we are going to take a look at and try to understand how I approached compartmentalization and breaking up my functions. And hopefully I won't make too many mistakes along the way. So again, the library folder is where my beautiful README file exists. So that's what we're going to start storing stuff. I'm going to migrate this full auth class into this library class that I have proposed. And again, if you've got something that you've done with cards or pages or whatever, set up a Domo class in here. Send a pull request, and let's start collaborating. All right, so I'm going to create a file called domo full auth.py, and you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to take everything. I'm going to cut it. Oh, lies. Just in case I blow up my code, let me duplicate the Jupyter notebook. And I'm going to call this refactor. Okay, And then let me close the original. Discard. All right. So I'm going to take the original Domo full auth class, and I'm just going to plop it into the Domo full auth py. And actually, I'm going to rename this. I'm just going to call this Domo auth because I can do full auth and the developer auth, but I only need one file for that. Okay, cool. So there it is, Domo full auth. If you're not familiar with what this data class does, I have done a whole tutorial about it, but let me just run through it real quick. Data class is a type of class in Python that allows me to have the attributes like the Domo username and password and token, but I can also have methods. So what does my function actually do? In this case, what does my class actually do? In this case, I have a method called getAuthToken that hits this API and returns a response. Now, let's just go over the basics real quick. How do I read in Domo full auth from another file? I will actually delete that whole chunk, and I'll do import Domo auth as I'm going to abbreviate it DMDA. So I've imported the library. I've imported library.domo auth, and I will call the DMDA Domo full auth class. That should work. So if I refresh, cool. So here I have printed my Domo full auth. Now, notice it didn't print the password. And again, I talked about this in my previous video. The whole point of this exercise is to make sure I don't accidentally print my password in clear text on YouTube. So what I've done is when I declared the Domo full auth class, I said, hey, Domo password is a string, but it is a field. So we have this kind of field function here, and we're saying, hey, represent is equal to false. Basically, don't print it, but it's still there. Cool. So that's just a very quick way to kind of decouple my implementation. So like, what am I doing in this Jupyter notebook from the library of the Domo auth class? And like I said, if I went to, let me see if I can do this live. We're going to create a new terminal. Because I'm hooked up to GitHub, where am I? I can go to cd library, and I can do git add the file, and I can do git commit -m add Domo auth class, and hopefully I can do a git push. And theoretically, I should be able to come over here to GitHub, press refresh. Am I recording? I am. Press refresh, and nothing. There it is. There's Domo auth, and there's my code. And like I said, you can now take this, download it, and life would be great. But I'm not happy with how I've kind of split up my code because it doesn't follow the guidelines. My guidelines say that any API functions should be put into a /roots folder. So let's go ahead and do that. Here in library, I have a roots folder. It's currently empty, but let me add a new file, and I'm going to create a file called roots fullauth.py. I'll just call it rootsauth.py. Cool. So basically, these in the right order so I don't lose my mind. Okay. So what I want to do is the part where I call the URL, basically all of this really, maybe up to here. Yeah. I'm going to take this and move this into roots auth py. This bit about the session token, I'm going to move as well. Okay. And now let's just reformat it. So I'm going to define an asynchronous function called get full auth. No, we're going to say get auth token, sorry. And it's asynchronous. So usually anytime I have an asynchronous request, I want to put it in some sort of a try catch block. If you don't know anything about asynchronous functions, that's okay. I did a pretty long tutorial that I'll try to link in here as well about it. But in order to get an auth token, what parameters do I need? I need the Domo instance, the Domo password, and the Domo username. Now you'll notice here previously I was referring to self. Now self, you'll usually see that in the context of back here. When I declared the Domo auth class, I said, hey, it's got these attributes, and then I can pass those attributes into a method using self. I'll say send my instance of the Domo full auth class into get auth token, and then peel off self.domo instance and peel off self.domo username. But because I'm setting this up as a function that lives separate from the class, I don't have access to self. So let's get rid of self, and we actually just have to pass those parameters in one at a time, which is actually a not bad way to write functions. You kind of want to decouple, like take apart whether or not I have to use this Domo auth class in order to call this function. I'd rather say, oh, give me an instance, give me a password, give me a username, and then I can just go do the thing. The reason why that's smart is because you might say, hey, Jay, I love this function. I have no interest in your whole class-based approach to writing code. So really, I just want to steal this function. Can I do that? Yes, because I've decoupled it. All right. But in order to make this work, what do I need? I need the client session. So I need to import AIO HTTP. Then I'm going to send the thing. Then I'm going to do the thing. Do I have a return? I don't have a return. So I'm going to return auth data. And anytime you open a session, you usually close the session. So that's good. All right, so I'm returning auth data into Domo auth. So let's simplify this code a little bit. Instead of doing all of this shenanigans, we are going to just delete that. And I'll say, let me import my new get auth token function. So I'll say import from library dot roots auth as roots. Okay, so we go ahead and import roots auth, and then I will call data equals await roots auth dot get token, and in order to get a token, I need to pass in Domo username equals self dot Domo username. Domo password equals self dot Domo password, and Domo instance equals self dot Domo instance. Again, you might be asking, Jay, you just took self out of this function. Why do you get to use self in the class? And the answer is because I'm calling this method within the class, and so it knows about itself. I can pass it in. Am I making a mistake? Yes, I have a different name. That doesn't make sense to you guys. No big deal. Just take the time to Google working with classes in Python. I'm not inventing anything by any stretch. Um, and then hopefully that'll kind of make sense a little bit more. All right. Let me go ahead and restart my workspace. When you have files that are or code that you're pulling in from different files, you find yourself reloading your kernel pretty often, which isn't great, but kind of comes with the territory. All right. I threw an error. It says in Domo auth py31 session not closed, session is not defined. Right. I am no longer referring to session, right? That's handled in some other code. I don't have to worry about it. So I can actually get rid of this line here, and I can just say pass. I don't need the final block to do anything just yet. Cool. Pro tip, if I'm making changes to processing in Domo auth in the class itself, I can use a library called import lib. So import lib and import lib.reload dmda, which is the name of the module. So it'll reload that, and that error message goes away. Cool. Pretty excited about this so far. How are we doing? I moved all of the code out of my implementation into a data class in the library. Very exciting. I haven't addressed errors yet. I haven't addressed returning a class. We're still just returning the token. That's fine. I moved the API request into /roots. That was awesome. Authenticating using full auth class is going to be related to using the actual classes, like getting a user or whatever, so that's not related. But let's take a look at how we use get data. All right, let's talk about get data. Actually, let me do a quick commit. Git add star git commit -m decoupled the API request. Cool. Did I misspell commit? Nope. Oh, I have a space. Git push. All right. So then I am not doing GitHub over again. I only get one chance to get this video right. Okay, so roots auth is perfect. Nice. Now, I want to actually make a new function called getData. And the reason why I'm going to make a new function called getData is because I don't want you to have to memorize all of this business with the sessions. Now, you might say, well, Jay, why are you bothering with AIO HTTP? Why aren't you just using the request library? Well, in my async video, I talk about if you want to run your code asynchronously, i.e., if you want to hit multiple APIs at the same time, like let's say I'm asking for data about 50 users. I don't want to have to wait till I finish user 1 before I can start user 2, wait for user 2 before I can start user 3. I want to just say, hey, I've got 50 API requests, send them all at the same time, and then collect the data as it arrives. And then once I have all 50 users, go on to the next task. That's called asynchronous code. And the the Python request library, the normal one that most people use, is synchronous, so you have to chain them one after another. But with asynchronous code, I can run my code a lot faster. I'll link a tutorial video, blah, 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 all the things. So I guess what I'm saying, very poorly, is that sometimes I actually might pass a session. I might pass a session into the getAuth token function. Well, that's a lie. For getAuth token, I'm not going to get multiple auth tokens at once, but for a lot of other code, I might pass in, like the user's example, I might pass in a session. So instead of having to ask you to remember how to deal with sessions, maybe I'll just create a little helper function called getData that will basically be a wrapper for hitting the URL. So let's see, what do I need? I'm going to take all of this one more time and actually move it into a separate function, and then I'll move it into a new file shortly. So let's see. Sometimes I'll pass in a client session. So then let's refactor this. So session is equal to session oops, if you pass in a session, then keep it. Otherwise, create a new one. Session equals session or AIOTT.client session. Yep, good. Then let's genericize this a little. Results is equal to await session.request. Okay, well, I don't know what method you're going to pass, so let me allow you to send in a method, which is of type string, but the default is post. Okay. And I'll need you to give me a URL. Can't get data without a URL. It will be of type string. And you'll probably pass a body. Oh, it says JSON, right? Mm-hmm. You don't have to pass a body, but a lot of times we do. Am I misspelling stuff? What's going on here? I need a comma and another comma and try. Okay. So if I don't have a session, create a session. My response, session.request, do the thing. Then we'll say data equals await response.json, and we will then return data. And yeah, when you're working with sessions, you usually want to close them unless you are running 50 requests at once and you're passing in the same session. So I need to check. I don't always want to close my session, so I'll say if session, let me write this a different way, is close session equals true if I don't pass in a session, else false. Right. So most days of the week, or sorry, let me rephrase that. I will only close the session if you didn't pass me a session because I had to create a new one. Otherwise, close session is false. And so in my finally, I'll say if is close session, then close it. Ooh. That's cool. Good, good, good. I like this so far. Now let's replace all of this with the get data. So again, we're just going to say, delete that, auth request is equal to await get data. Your method is still post. Your URL is the URL. Instead of calling it JSON, I'm now calling it body because I think that's just language that most of us are familiar with. Um, cool. Those are the parameters I have to send. Good. And then we'll leave that alone for now. All right, so from data, we got a response, but the response has already been converted into JSON, so I don't need to handle that here. I can just go ahead and return the response. I don't have to worry about the session. That was handled upstream, so let me close that out. Now, that said, here I said get data can sometimes receive a session, so I need to be able to pass session. Well, in this case, it's get auth token. I don't need to pass the session, so we're good. Disregard. I'm going to go ahead and move all of this into a standalone function because someday I'm going to write another auth file that has nothing, sorry, another set of roots that has nothing to do with authentication someday, maybe today, and use AIO-HTTP. Cool. I think we're looking good. Yeah. Let's go ahead and reload and see how we did. Please not 100 errors. Dang it. Well, I got an auth object. Sorry, no, I just printed the auth. I don't know that I got a token here. Oh, because I didn't import get data into roots auth. Yeah, silly. Import library dot roots dot get data as get data. All right, let's try it again. Please work. Aha, no errors. I love that. Did I get a token? No, I don't have a token. Why don't I have a token? It didn't throw any errors, so here I am in my full auth. If auth data.get is, if all of that is equal to true, then set self.token equal to token. So why didn't I get a... Oh, it helps if you await, Mr. Wilson. I I'm printing full auth, which is fine. I don't need to do that anymore. I declared full auth as these parameters. I now need to tell it, hey, get the token, and then I'm going to see if it can print a token. Let's go. No dice. What? Okay, I'm going to need to put in a debug. I'm going to need to pause the recording and debug. I don't want to print my password, so give me a sec. Okay, I'm recording again. Yeah, that's hilarious. I was testing my code with like invalid passwords, and I managed to lock out my account, and that's why I wasn't receiving a token. But since we're on that topic, why don't we? Well, one, let me commit my code, because I know, I didn't change anything. I just had to reset my password. The token works. Let me commit my code, and then let's take a look at some error handling. So let's see. Git add. D or created get data function. Nice. Okay. let me just confirm real quick that that's in there. GitHub root data. Aha, get data's there. Huzzah. All right, back to work. Lies. Before I handle errors, what I want to do, coming back to my documentation, what I want to do is I want to have a consistent way of retrieving a response from the API. And the reason why I want to do this is I want to make it a little bit easier for me to write code where I can handle, was my request successful or not? My API request successful or not? And if you think about why might I throw an error, I just ran into one. My credentials had changed. Or maybe I am hitting a URL that doesn't exist. Or I don't know, there could be a number of reasons why I have errors. So what I don't want to do is have a different response from within my app. Um, if it's true or false. I want it always have the same shape, and then I can build error handling around it. That's my reasoning. I don't know if I'm overcomplicating things. Given how hard I've worked at learning error handling, I think I am making it a little harder than it needs to be. But here we go. And in fact, I've made it so difficult that I have to check my notes. So give me 2 seconds while I stare at my notes. Okay, here we go. We're going to jump into get data. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a data class called response get data. And this data class will have a status of type integer. It will have a is success of type Boolean. It will have the actual response. And let's pass the URL that we sent. Okay. Sure, maybe that'll work. So here, when I get data, let's say if response.status is equal to 200 or response.status is equal to 204. I think those are the two successes, right? What I will do is I will, instead of returning just the data, I'm going to return an instance of the response get data class where the status is equal to response.status and is success is equal to true and the response is equal to, you know what, I don't think I need that way, so let me do it like that. Ooh, I'll probably regret that later, but that's okay. We'll leave it for now. And URL is equal to URL. So those are the successes. Else, let's do return response get data again. Status is equal to response.status is success is equal to false. And response, ooh, I missed an equal sign, will be equal to response dot, I think, reason. Ooh, I hope this works. And self.url is equal to URL. Sure. That looks good. Save that. And so now that's get data, but I have a roots auth in between. So now roots auth, oh, sorry, here. When we now get data, will always return a class response get data, so I can tell it, hey, you're going to return response get data. Some nice little documentation tips. Cool. Here in roots auth, you are going to receive response get data. Cool. Now again, guys, notice I'm not doing any error handling in the get auth token function. And the reason why I'm doing that is because, again, you might say, hey, I want to handle printing and error handling completely different from how Jay Wilson has implemented it. So for me, when I keep this pretty neutral and like do the minimum amount of effort to get the data out, that means that you can use this however you want. But what that does mean for me is in the Domo auth class, in the get auth token, here is where I have to do all of the work around, okay, how do I want my library, my implementation of get auth token to work? And so let's see what that's going to look like. Remember, get auth token is now receiving response get data. Response get data. Let me just call this a response, actually. So we'll say this is now called response.success, and that's is success. Okay. I'm going to switch the order of these tests. So if response.isSuccess is true and response.response, because that's the data, has get a session token, what are they called? Key. Then we will print token received. We'll set self.token equal to response.get session token. Cool. But what if it doesn't? So what if res.isSuccess is equal to true, meaning it was able to query the URL, but there was no session token? So I need an elif. Then we're going to print no token received. And I have an emoji somewhere. Let me copy this little emoji guy. I like emojis. It makes it easier to like, oh, nope, that's not what I wanted. There we go. All right, so no token received. And here, now that I haven't received a token, I want to throw some sort of an error. So let's see, how do I build an error? Again, I got to check my notes because this was, oh no, I deleted them. Dang it. So dumb. All right, class invalid authentication. It's going to be based off of the exception class. Now, here, just in case you haven't seen this before, here I'm implementing a data class, which is a type of class. And what happens is data class is a wrapper that goes around whatever I put here and makes it behave a certain way. And so it modifies the behavior of a base class. What we're looking at here is I'm implementing a quote-unquote normal class. And if I just had this, I would say, okay, I want to create a class called invalid authentication error. But I'm going to base the invalid authentication error on another class called exception. So it's going to inherit the properties of exception. Again, if you've never heard of inheritance with classes, that's a whole nother year of tutorial videos. So we'll leave it at that. Now, I'm just going to say pass. So all I'll do, it won't do anything, but it will throw the error. Now, to actually, sorry, that's defining the error. To throw the error, I'm going to say raise, what I call it? Invalid authentication error. Let me just copy paste because I can't type. Cool. So now I have a try catch block. I don't have a return. Sorry, I need to return self.token. Okay. So now I have a try catch block where I might end up throwing an invalid authentication error. So I need to add in exception handling into my code. So I'm going to say except invalid authentication error. Let me just alias it as E. And so what can I do? Oops, sorry, I think this code is going to go down here. Maybe that'll work. And then maybe I don't need a finally. All right. Ooh, lots of changes. Hope it works the first time. Please work the first time. Oh, I forgot a colon after here. Again, I'm using import lib.reload, so it's going to reload the code that's in the Domo auth module. Okay. Is success equals false. Invalid syntax, get data line 34. Get data line 34. Forgot a comma. That's classy. I'm so envious of people who can write code and not throw errors while they're making tutorial videos because, no reason. Get data line 36. Expression cannot contain assignment. Get data line 36. Get data line. Don't move stuff. Oh, because I have self. Why would I include self? No selfs here. Please work. Aha! Nice. So token received. I have a token. Huzzah. So the code works. Now let's just test and make sure what happens if I throw invalid password. Okay. Hey, no token received. I wonder if I can get a little bit more descriptive. Let's say invalid credentials. No token received. Okay. Nice. Now this is interesting, guys. When you use a try catch block here, when you use a try catch block, it stops your code from just like breaking. But it also means that it it looks successful, but it didn't break, right? Which is good, which is good. The alternative, and this is probably what most of us do, most of us probably don't use a try catch block. I need to be careful how many times I send an invalid password, so I'm going to send a valid password first, and then I'm going to send an invalid password. Okay. All right. So here's what happens when you don't use that try catch block. What happens is it just gives you, hey, I have an error, and it's ugly, and you get this big red thing, which I actually kind of prefer. But if I have a long script and like, oh, well, your maybe it wasn't critical for your code to error out here. Sometimes it might be nice to just use a try catch block so it doesn't have the big ugly red. So that's a strong reason to get comfortable working with try catch blocks, not necessarily for this bit of code, but just for future stuff you do. Okay, so with that done, before I commit to Python, let's see what happens. Or sorry, commit to GitHub. Let's see what happens if I hit an invalid instance. So here, I created the full auth. It's obviously not a valid Domo instance, but again, I don't have an error. And in my opinion, this is kind of where it gets a little bit dangerous with these try-catch blocks. You have to be really confident that you're catching all of your errors. So if you haven't defined explicitly all of your errors, you might add except. Oh, no, that's not where the error is. The error is here. So let's do this. Let's say else. Um, Trying to remember. Yeah. Let's say else. Let's print the response. I think that's safe. So here I'm sending invalid instance, and I have a 403 error. It says forbidden. So it's telling me, hey, this URL is probably not a valid URL. And now I have a question. I'm asking myself, should I build the error handling here in getAuth token, or should I move the error handling here to get data? Because remember with get data, I have a 200 or a 204 test. And if it's not 200 or 204, I said is success is false. I think what I'll do, and again, this is a part where I'm kind of waffling and figuring out how I want to build things. But I think what I'll do is I'll say class forbidden URL, and it's going to be based off of the exception class again. And then now I have to define my init. Okay. So let's take a quick look over here. In Domo auth, when we previously defined our exception, we actually didn't pass any parameters. We didn't do anything. We just said throw an error, and then we printed stuff down here. But if I want to be able to, in get data, if I want to be able to throw an error and return a response, I have to pass these parameters. The status is success, response, and URL. I have to pass those parameters into my oh my gosh, into my class. And actually, as I say that out loud, instead of passing the parameters, maybe I'll pass in the response object. Do I need a self? I need a self. I'll pass in self. I'll pass in my response object. And then what I'll do is I'll say self, the class, store the response in self.response. And then maybe I'll format an error message and say self.message is equal to my message will be, let me steal that red X. I like that. And I'll say response.status, response.response, at response.url. And then, in order to print the message or have the message be part of the error, you have to pass that into the exception class. Again, this is the whole inheritance thing. If you don't know what that is, it's okay. I don't either. But there are videos and tutorials about it. So I'll just say, and I'm actually looking at my notes off screen and just making sure I'm spelling that correctly. I think that's correct. Okay. So all of this is happening in the initialization phase of this class, and I have to pass it, which is based off of the exception class. All right, so then down here, what I'll do is I'll say, hey, the response is equal to status false reason URL, but now I want to raise the forbidden URL exception. Let me do, instead of calling it forbidden URL, because that's a pretty big assumption, let me just call it invalid response error. And then I will pass in the response is equal to the response. Then, lastly, in my exception handling, exception invalid response error as E. What am I going to do? I am going to return E.response. Remember, E.response refers to the error. When I declare the error, when I raise the error, I passed this in as what I'm storing in the response. And I stored the response onto the invalid response error class using this line here, this self class. And then maybe I will also print e.message. That needs to be except, not exception. Oof. Cool. Yep. Let me save this. Let me take a look at Domo auth. Is this kind of the way I want it? I think so. Oh man, please work the first time. Let's go. All right, what happened? What happened is I printed full auth. I don't need to print that. Okay, here. What happened is I have my 403 error forbidden. And this line is printed from get data. In fact, to help me figure out where I'm throwing this error, maybe I will append print get data fn e.message. Okay, just to really prove where the error is being thrown. So I'm throwing it in the get data function, but I don't see red because I'm using these try excepts. So it says, hey, in 403, the error message says it was forbidden, and instance, oh, I misspelled instance, I need to go fix it. Here, I'm printing response get data. Why am I printing response get data? Because in Domo auth, I said, hey, if you're a success, then you're a success. If success is true, but there's no token, we probably have an invalid authentication error, else just print the results, the response. And so here what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, instead of printing the entire response, I'm going to say, let me create a new class, invalid, I'm going to say invalid request. No, I'm not. You know what I'm going to do? Yeah, I'm going to make a new one. I'm going to say, unsuccessful authentication attempt error exception. So it's a little bit vaguer, a little bit more vague. But it's not the same as invalid authentication, right? It's not invalid credentials. Let me actually rewrite this as invalid credentials error. Let me say, yeah. All right, so this will go here, invalid credentials error. And then here, I'm just going to have a more generic unsuccessful authentication attempt error. Cool. And this one will have no parameters, so that's fine. And then let me raise. Or define the exception, invalid authentication attempt. No token received. Cool. Right. Cool. So in the get data function, we threw the 403 forbidden, and then my response from the get token attempt was invalid authentication attempt. I'm actually going to indicate get token fn get token fn. But let me put the x first. You're probably wondering why I'm indicating where the error happened, like what function it happened in. That's because if I had like 4 or 5 nested functions, it can become a little bit challenging to figure out where I need to troubleshoot. So that's kind of a nice little indicator that tells me where I need to go. If I pass in the correct Domo instance now, and I just passed the wrong password, right? It tells me, hey, get token function errored out, you passed invalid credentials. I passed correct valid credentials, party hat. Okay. I feel good about this. There was a lot of stuff going on here. So let me go ahead and commit my code. Oops. Oh no. here. And do we have our authentication? Sure do. Okay. Maybe I'll make this a two-part video. Let me pause the video now. Um, let just real quick for review. My goal in this is to give the community a repository where we can start as a community recycling and harnessing our knowledge. All of us are dealing with different parts of the Domo API in terms of authentication. Let's just have one nice, consistent way where we build code, or maybe it's just me. I'm going to have one nice, consistent way of building code based off of a series of Domo classes. I'm going to try to get in the habit of using exceptions for error handling. I'm going to try to get into the habit of returning classes when it's appropriate. I'm going to use /roots to decouple the API request from how I want to implement it in the Domo class. Now that I've actually shown you how I would really properly build out the full auth class, this is how I will handle authentication against all of my other Domo classes moving into the future. I'm going to try to take advantage of the response get data class when I'm transferring data between my API request into the Domo class. Again, to decouple the code, but to force it to always be in the same shape. And then lastly, we looked at using the get data function as the most low level, if you will, of the functions that actually sends the data to the APIs. That way, when I need to do loops, when I need to run code asynchronously, I have a pretty sweet function that works as boilerplate almost for stuff that I don't want to have to code over and over again. Sweet. I hope you guys found that useful. This is kind of my introduction to how I approach Python. In the next video, I'm actually going to go ahead and refactor. What am I refactoring next? In the next video, I'm going to refactor how we built the Domo role into a class, and then again, put it up into Domo roles and Domo users. We'll refactor it, put it into GitHub, and then you guys will have access to it. Good luck, have fun, catch you later.